Chapter 4. Are you a bloodsucker? By the time I graduated from primary school, in May of 1966, when I was just 12, the Cultural Revolution was already approaching. The newspapers were full of criticism of the three-family village, a group of writers whose works they called poisonous weeds. After I had been at home for only 2 weeks, I was summoned back to school for a meeting, just like a real grown-up. This was the first time my classmates and I participated in what came to be known as a political study, an activity now as integral to urban Chinese life as lining up at the dining hall for a breakfast of rice gruel and mantou. Our teacher read to us from the newspapers about how our class enemies were working from within to deliberately attack and smash the party and socialism. These enemies had derided the great leap forward of the late 50s as just a lot of boasting. They had slandered the dictatorship of the proletariat and even told our great party to take a rest. Our teacher explained that workers, peasants, and soldiers must join together to fight against these insidious black intellectuals and not be taken in by their devious and subtle methods. Even though we were still small, he said, we too had a part to play. We should begin by writing compositions denouncing our enemies. We should take out our notebooks and open fire. I didn't really know what to write, but I found several phrases that sounded right to me and set them down carefully. The three-family village is evil. They attack the party and socialism. Down with the capitalist elements. Down with Wuhan. Down with Deng Tuo. Down with Liang. I felt extremely busy and important, and after the meeting I hurried home to tell my sisters everything. But they were just as excited as I was, having been through the same things in their own schools. Liang put me in my place. Everyone's denouncing those people. What makes you think you're so special? On the next 2 days, we learned songs and dances with simple lyrics, like Down with the three-family village, Workers, peasants, and soldiers unite, Angrily open fire on the black gang. There was also a pageant in which 3 students imitated the writers. One bent down and gnawed, pointing upward and said, "The sun is black," while a second chortled evilly and agreed, "Not all flowers are red." The rest of us were workers, peasants, and soldiers, and wielded huge cardboard pencils like bayonets, shouting, "Angrily open fire." Such activities were a lot of fun and a welcome break from the aimless life at home in the newspaper compound. I was always sorry when our meetings were over. In Changsha City, though, the wave of criticism was still mounting, and we heard more and more about a great proletarian cultural revolution that was to expose the reactionary capitalist stand of the academic authorities who opposed the party and socialism. It was also extremely confusing. So one rare evening, when father was at home reading his newspaper under the hanging light bulb, I asked him what he thought. He sighed pensively and began to reminisce, as he often did when he wanted to teach me something. "You know, before liberation I suffered terribly. After your grandfather died, my mother couldn't feed my brother and sisters and me, so she put us in an orphanage. The rest had already died. Then after the orphanage was bombed by the Japanese, I was lucky if I could get even one bowl of rice to eat every day. Fortunately, some relatives helped me to get to a school, and while I was there, I joined the KMT's youth league, thinking they had the way to save China. Then in Kunming, I met some party members working underground. They taught me about revolution and gave me books to read. I gradually understood how important socialism was for our people and began to participate in party activities. I wrote poems and articles for them, and eventually they trained me to become a reporter. I was lucky enough to help found the Hunan Daily when Changsha was liberated. Did you know I helped to edit the very first issue ever printed? We took over the old KMT Central Daily and called it the New Hunan News, and the calligraphy for a masthead was written by Chairman Mao himself. Those were exciting days. I had heard these things many times before, but I loved hearing them again. It was just like the old days when Father used to tell us stories. I sat very still, hoping he would continue. The party saved me, and I have always believed that the party understands far more than we ordinary people ever can what is right for our country. My greatest dream is that someday I'll fulfill the conditions and be accepted as a party member, for there could be no greater honor for a writer on this earth. But meeting the requirements is no easy matter. Sometimes we have struggle with ourselves. The anti-rightist movement was a terrible test for me, but I conquered myself and supported the party. It makes me very sad to see that some people have capitalist ideas and want to oppose the only system that can build China. They're not bad men, but we should help them see their errors. You should help them too, and at the same time, you can learn for yourself about how important it is always to support the party. You can learn about principles of revolution so you will never make political mistakes the way they have. My father's words fill me with pride because he was talking to me about his own thoughts almost like a grown-up. I felt I understood better why he had been so strict with Liang on the question of breaking with our mother, and why she had tried so hard to reform her thought and join the League. Now I know why Father was always asking us to study the works of Chairman Mao and write self-examinations when we have done something wrong. Although I have heard many of the same words from my teachers, coming from him they had much more impact, and I was filled with a sense of great responsibility to the party. I resolved that I would always try to make Father proud of me and actively help the party to fight against capitalism. But it seems I was to have no chance because the criticism movement appeared to be over. Liang told me it was because work teams had been sent to all schools to supervise the Cultural Revolution, but instead of helping to carry out the movement, they were upholding the leaders' conservative views and holding back the eager students. They were even collecting information about the more radical students and labeling them counter-revolutionaries and small rightists because they had gone to present petitions at the municipal and provincial party communities. Liang had been an activist and was furious. We thought the work team would support us, she said, but instead they organized student spies to gather black materials about us, and they claim we're obstructing the Cultural Revolution. They call us monsters and demons and want to sweep us away, when they're the ones who are counter-revolutionary. Everything's backwards. Well, we'll see who's right. We'll see who's doing the obstructing. For a while it seemed that Liang was wrong. The work teams had control. The situation was quiet, the way hot water is when the fire is down low, merely simmering. But when, on July 16, 1966, Chairman Mao swam for an hour in the Yangtze River, it boiled. I will always remember that event, partly because it was the first occasion on which the newspaper was printed in red ink. Later, it happened often. In fact, the printing color became an issue of unusual revolutionary sensitivity. Once, when black ink was used when it should have been red, there were demonstrations for days. The issue was also distributed free of charge, so the lines of people waiting for their copies stretched way down the street. The whole nation rejoiced because a beloved leader had battled the waves for so long at the age of more than 70, turning his feat inevitably into a metaphor. The current of the Yangtze is strong, and there are many waves. But if a person is not afraid to struggle, he will overcome all difficulties, he said. His swim celebrated his strength and the strength of his policies. It was another spur in the side of revolution. Great congratulatory festivities were held in every unit, and the streets shook with drums and firecrackers. Changsha looked just like it did on National Day, with red flags in a row over the gateway to every unit and special red lanterns glowing at night. I felt close to this great leader who had always been a little mysterious to me. I understood swimming and knew what it was like to feel tired after being in the water for a long time. I was 12 years old and very strong, but I doubted that I could swim for as long as Chairman Mao had. At least, I knew The Chairman Mao was made of human flesh and blood, and at the same time I was moved with an even greater respect. I resolved once again to serve him with all my heart. A little more than a week after the swim, Liang came home, flushed and ecstatic. "We've won," she announced. "The work teams are being withdrawn. The black materials that they collected will be burned. The student caps will be taken off, and everybody will go home and write self-criticisms." Father arrived soon after, and he knew more. Through the newspaper, he often heard things before everyone else. He told us how while Chairman Mao had been away from Peking in recent months, the Central Committee had taken a revisionist line, stifling the Cultural Revolution while pretending to support it. As soon as Chairman Mao returned to the capital after his swim in the Yangtze, he held a lot of meetings, and the Cultural Revolution Directorate ordered the withdrawal of the work teams. Suddenly, Father lowered his voice, as if he couldn't quite believe his own words. Even Chairman Liu was criticized and will have to write a self-examination. It is amazing. He shook his head and paused. "You'd better not tell anyone because it's still internal information." I felt a thrill of pride that my father knew so much and was bursting with the desire to tell my friends, but my excitement was tempered by the fact that father was obviously troubled by the news, as if he couldn't quite accept the idea that there was conflict within the party. I realized now that his faith was being challenged for the first time. The secret was out soon enough, for on August 5th, Chairman Mao put up his famous "Bombard the headquarters" poster. He criticized leaders from the central down to the local levels, accusing them for suppressing revolutionaries and juggling black and white. His major targets were obviously Liu Shaoqi, Chief of State and Vice Chairman of the Communist Party, Deng Xiaoping, General Secretary of the Central Committee Secretariat, and Tao Zhu, Secretary of the Central South Party Committee. Soon the whole city was transformed into a circus of posters. New work teams appeared at the Hunan Daily, and within a day posters went up on the modern Soviet-style office building. Unlike the general denunciations of the past, there were now pointed attacks against specific individuals. One of the first to go was Senior Assistant Editor Meng. I read about him with amazement. First of all, the poster said he had willfully obstructed the Cultural Revolution. Second, he had pretended great revolutionary purity in order to hide his landlord background. Third, his personal life was immoral and suspicious, for when his wife died, he took her older sister as his second wife. The death had been far too convenient, and the posters demanded to know who was really responsible. I felt a thrill of fear. That familiar, pompous official who had given my father the Chairman Mao's selected works as a wedding gift was a secret criminal. Another victim was a typesetter in his 50s, a man on good terms with my family who had invited father to his home several times. He had been a cavalry officer for the KMT, and photographs of him on his horse and all his military splendor were taken from his file and prominently displayed on the office building wall. He had, of course, discussed his past with the party before and given them everything they asked for, including the pictures. I was fascinated to discover this grizzled neighbor transformed into a grand military officer with a gleaming sword, and wondered which of my other neighbors would prove to have extraordinary alter egos. All this was an exciting process, which none of us dared to question. It seemed that everyday good people were exposed as evil ones lurking behind revolutionary masks. Friendly people were hidden serpents, revolutionaries became counter-revolutionaries, and officials, who usually rode cars to meetings, might actually be murderers. It was confusing because the changes came so fast, and we used to joke with each other saying, "They dug somebody else up today," meaning that, as the newspapers like to put it, the telescope of Chairman Mao thought has been used to enlarge our enemies and review them in their original states. Still, most people felt that the Cultural Revolution was a wonderful thing, because when our enemies were uncovered, China would be much more secure. So I felt excited and happy and wished I could do something to help. Then one morning, when I was sitting at home with nothing special to do, the little Li walked in. He was the smartest of my playmates and my good friend, and I was pleased to see him. He sat down with his customary seriousness on the edge of the bed and said, "You know, everyone has been quoting Chairman Mao, saying, 'There's no wrong in revolution. It is right to rebel. We should do something too. There are a lot of capitalist tendencies in our old primary school. Remember how Teacher Luo was always quoting the Russians? We should organize the other student and launch a cultural revolution there too.' I thought this was a great idea. We would be following Chairman Mao just like the grown-ups, and Father would be proud of me. I suppose, too, I resent the teachers who had controlled and criticized me for so long, and I looked forward to a little revenge. As it turned out, so did many of the other students, and they were delighted to be able to use Chairman Mao's stamp of approval to do what before they could only do under the cover of darkness with a slingshot and a window. Our unity was instantaneous, and we met at Little Li's apartment that evening. We had the place to ourselves because his mother lived at her own unit and his father was a proofreader who worked the night shift. Little Li went to the newspaper to get some paper and ink and returned with his arms full. "They support us," he told us excitedly. "They say we can have all the supplies we need, and maybe later even an office." This was more than we had dared to dream of. We divided up the paper happily. One sheet for each person and a pile for me, since I was to draw satirical cartoons. But then, faced with the vast open spaces before us, we suddenly discovered we didn't know what capitalism and revisionism really were. Little Li was the only one able to come up with anything, and he painted with a flourish angrily opened fire on the Hunan Daily's attached primary school's capitalist revisionist line. We all thought this was just fine, but it was obviously not enough, and we sat in worried silence until my friend Gandhi's old brother, Gang Xian, made a good suggestion. "Why don't we go out to the streets and see what other people have written?" That was the first time in my life I didn't go home to bed. We spent half the night wandering around, writing down the words on the big character posters. The low gray buildings along Changsha's main streets were literally white with paper, shining in dual yellow lamplight. The glass shop windows were unrecognizable, and posters even hung from between the parasol trees, rustling like ghosts in the night. Even at that hour, people were rushing about, shouting and putting up new posters, as if all the grievances that had been suppressed for so many years were coming out at once, shaking the city. I suppose the workers felt somewhat the way we did, and were using the Cultural Revolution to get back at their superiors for everything from tiny insults to major abuses of policy. The posters on the Sun Yat-sen Road department store attached the leaders for allowing the workers no freedom of discussion and willfully speaking for all. They accused the leaders for taking home government property and using influence to get scarce goods and special privileges. They denounced one leader for insulting women by touching their shoulders when he spoke to them, and another for wearing slippers to work and taking off his shirt in the office. The leaders of the Grass Pavilion Street Residents Committee were attacked for sitting around in their offices reading newspapers and playing mahjong instead of resolving the people's problems. Those at the car repair factory for caring more for dancing than administration and for delivering reports while dressed in their shorts. Leaders at the North District Party Committee were guilty of all these abuses and more, including taking up the revisionist waste of the departed Soviet experts by living in their abandoned guest houses. The lists of crimes went on, and it was clear to us that everything was fair game. It was hard to sort it all out, but by the time we returned to Little Li's house at 1 a.m., we knew what to write. Gandhi denounced the music teacher for her high heels and coquettish voice. Little Monkey said teacher Chen used the capitalist teaching method by always telling us stories for 10 minutes before class to calm us down. The son of a press photographer wrote about how the math teacher wore perfume in the summertime. Gang Xian had once been harshly punished for farting in class. He criticized the hygiene teacher for making us sit with our arms behind us and our hands on our elbows, a criticism that we all applauded heartedly. But best of all was Little Li's criticism of teacher Luo, in which his boasts of using advanced Soviet teaching methods were used as proof of his surrender to the USSR. I illustrated this with a picture of a man with a shiny bald head standing before a blackboard with a piece of chalk in one hand and a Soviet flag in the other. I also drew teacher Chen holding a baby with 20 heads in her arms, and the math teacher with a bottle of perfume held to her armpit and a swarm of flies buzzing around her head. "Why does it stink?" the caption read. "It is the stink of capitalism." Everybody liked my cartoons very much, and we decided our work was so good that we should post it in a prominent place where everyone in the newspapers could see it. It was near dawn when we went to put up our masterpieces on the old brick dining hall. As we scooped the messy paste out of our basin with our hands, we imagined how everyone would praise us as revolutionary pathbreakers. At last we put up a blank sheet and all of us signed our names. Then we separated. I went home with Little Li and didn't wake up until noon the next day. My friend was very excited, for he had already been to the dining hall. Many grown-ups were crowded around our posters, praising us and saying that we were very brave. I imagined the great respect we would now enjoy, so I hurried eagerly home to listen to Father's compliment. He was there waiting for me, but he didn't look happy. "Well," he said sarcastically, "so the revolutionary pathbreaker is home. Did you break a path to anything to eat?" His words stunned me, and I didn't answer, going to the table and picking up a cold mantou left over from breakfast. "Put that down." He was very fierce. "Sit down, I want to talk to you." Suddenly I wanted to rebel at home too. I was tired of being controlled so tightly. Between home and school, I felt I could barely move. I yelled, "It's right to rebel, it's right to rebel, it's right to rebel." I found myself stamping my feet and flailing my arms in rhythm. "You should see how stupid you look," commented my father dryly. "Cursing a revolutionary pathbreaker is what's stupid," I returned. I grabbed a piece of paper and my father's writing brush. "We'll see who needs posters," I said. "Put down that brush," he commanded. "You never touch my brush, understand?" I shrugged and picked up a pen and wrote in big characters, "It's right to rebel. Liang says a revolutionary pathbreaker is stupid. If he doesn't admit his wrongs, Heng will open fire on him." I marched into his bedroom and stuck my poster on the foot of his bed with a thumbtack. But my father was only amused. "If Chairman Mao knew, I wonder what he'd think of you," he asked. "Chairman Mao wants us to rebel," I answered immediately. "Calm down now, why don't you? Sit down," he said gently. "Let's talk together." Unfortunately, my experiences as a rebel were only an evening long, so in the end I sat down. My self-righteous passion transformed into the apprehension of a small boy. Father said, "Last night you did an inglorious thing. You thought you were really something, didn't you? With so many people looking at your cartoons, but why did you want to be so disrespectful to your teachers? Don't you understand how disgraceful your behavior is?" It was unbearable to be lectured after I had expected so much glory. I answered bravely, "Doesn't Chairman Mao want us to criticize capitalist thought? If teachers have capitalist thought, shouldn't they be criticized? Didn't you tell me yourself that we must obey the party and carry out the Cultural Revolution?" "Capitalist thought?" he exclaimed, "Do you think the things you drew pictures of were capitalist thought? Your teachers were so good to you, giving you knowledge when you were still so small, training you, caring for you, and then not only don't you thank them, you insult and humiliate them." Of course it is right to heed Chairman Mao's call, but the purpose of this movement is to ferret out our enemies, not to attack our friends. Now I want you to take a book of quotations from Chairman Mao and study it carefully. Find out what he really wrote. Father went into his bedroom and study, where there were bookcases with several hundred volumes, and returned, thumbing through a precious copy of the quotations of Chairman Mao, the Little Red Book. That, as yet, had been distributed only to high-ranking cadres and newspapermen. "Look here," he said. "Chairman Mao may have said, 'It is right to rebel,' but he also said, 'Among revolutionary comrades, one should not use a rough manner.'" I took the book and looked at the place Father had marked, and my heart hesitated because he was right. Chairman Mao had said those words. "Eat now," Father said, "and think about it. This afternoon you can study the quotations, and when you have finished, you can write a self-examination for me." It was 2 p.m., and my father went to work. I was miserable. I knew I had been wrong. "Although the teachers have capitalist tendencies," I wrote, "they are still revolutionary comrades. We should help them, not insult them. I think I was wrong." When Father returned after 5, he held out his hand for my paper. I gave it to him and he read it carefully. "Good," he said finally, "but I think you need to do one more thing. Because what you did was very wrong. You should go to your teachers' houses and apologize." My heart sank. What would my classmates say? That I was a coward, a traitor? But Father stood there smoking, and his eyes bored through his glasses and deep into me, as if they saw everything. I moved reluctantly through the door. It must have taken me a full half-hour to walk to the attached primary school, which was really just 10 minutes from our house. I found new alleyways among the brick buildings and lingered at the basketball court, always imagining how angry the teachers must be, and wondering whether they would ignore me or yell at me. When I finally came to Teacher Luo's dormitory, I was in such a state that I would have run home if a cat had darted out of the bushes. Teacher Luo's wife was taking the laundry in front of the balcony. "Liang Heng!" she cried, and it was too late to escape. Then she called inside. "Luo Qingguang, Liang Heng 来了." Teacher Luo came out immediately, and to my utter shock, he was smiling and nodding as if he hadn't seen me for a long time. "Liang Heng, come right upstairs and have some tea. We'll have a talk." When I was uncomfortably seated with a dish of candy before me and a cup of tea at my elbow, Teacher Luo said, "Your father came to see me this afternoon." He continued gently, "It doesn't matter. It all belongs to the past." I said, "Teacher Luo, please pardon me. I'm very sorry." He said, "Forget about it. If you ever have any questions about your schoolwork, you're always welcome here." A very special feeling shocked me, and I got up in confusion and nodded and ran out the door so he wouldn't see me crying, nearly knocking over the dish of candy as I went. How could he be so kind to me after what I have done to him? Didn't he remember that I had painted him with the Soviet flag in his hand? Father had been to see all the other teachers too, and they all treated me kindly and accepted my apologies. But as I walked home, I was in a panic for fear one of my classmates would see me and ask where I'd been. I would never tell them what I had done. From then, I would choose my methods more carefully so that I would never again be placed in such an ignoble position. Of course, I had no intention of giving up rebellion, not when the whole country was involved in the Cultural Revolution. The next step was to give a rebel group a more formal status. Little Lee organized us and about 30 young teenage boys from the newspaper, and after much discussion, we chose the name Criticize Revisionism Struggle Team. I did not speak so loudly as before my apology to the teachers, but I certainly was an active member. We announced ourselves on red paper one sunny afternoon, all 30 of our names painted in black ink. The Hunan Daily Cultural Revolution Committee gave us an unbelievably big 2-room office, a printing press and paper, blankets, and a red flag. No one could have been prouder than little Li and I as we surveyed our new domain. But the next morning, as little Li, Gang Di, Gang Xian, and I were writing our blackboard newspapers, the photographer's son ran up gasping. Something terrible. Didn't want to be in our organization anymore. Little Li's eyebrows were as straight as a sword across his square face as he demanded, "Who doesn't want to be in our organization?" "All of them. They've taken their names away." We ran over to the dining hall, and we were dumbfounded. 23 names had been inked out, and our red poster now looked like a slice of watermelon full of black pits. The 7 remaining names were all of those of the sons of intellectuals, editors, reporters, the photographer, and the art editor. We stood looking at each other. Finally, little Li spoke what was in our minds. "Well, we'll keep going anyway. We'll protect Chairman Mao's struggle to the death." His words were the same as those we heard on broadcast, but braver and more inspiring. We nodded our heads resolutely. But before we'd recover from our shock, something even worse happened. One of our ex-comrades walked by and sneered at us, and then it spat on the cement at our feet. "You sons of reactionary, capitalist, stinking intellectuals. Run and look at your father's big character posters. Then hurry home and criticize them, why don't you?" I was simply unable to comprehend his words. My father wasn't a powerful official, had never accepted bribes or used public furniture, had never used power to criticize a worker unfairly. He was just a low-ranking cadre, working for a party newspaper, and no one in the whole world loved Chairman Mao better than he. How could there be a poster about him? How could anyone say he had capitalist thought? As in a dream, we hurried to the office building. There had been a lot of new activity. Now the posters stretched all the way up to the 4th floor, and ropes, hung with still more, had been strung from one wing of the L to the other. To get through, you had to push posters aside like hanging curtains. We began the painful search for our father's names. What would have been a game the day before was now a nightmare. We found little Li's father first. "Publicly expose the KMT spy, Li Xiaoxiong," the poster cried. Although Li Xiaoxiong is an old party member, he wears his party clothes to disguise his true mission. Before liberation, he was an active reporter for the KMT Central Daily, and he volunteered to stay behind as a spy when we routed Chiang Kai-shek's dogs, and they fled to Taiwan. Every day he gathers information for them and works against us from within. As a proofreader, he had many opportunities to show his hatred of the party, as on the occasion when he deliberately turned the character 10,000 upside down. But our great leader Chairman Mao will live 10,000 and 10,000 years despite such pernicious spies. Down with Li! I couldn't believe it. Little Li had told me so many times about his father's glorious career as an underground party member before liberation. At times I had been envious, wishing I could be proud of my own father. This was like seeing him in the distorted mirror. Could little Li have been lying to me? I turned to look at my friend. He was staring like a statue and biting his lower lip, while 2 tears rolled down his motionless face. Then, Gang Di pulled me by the sleeve. He had found my father's posters. I followed him numbly through the gaily painted paper, still believing there had been a mistake, but then I saw the terrible words, burning characters on brilliant yellow paper. Expose the plot of the reactionary scholar Liang to the light of day. There were too many sheets, maybe 10 or more, each as tall as a man, and every word engraved itself on my heart with a blazing knife. Every phrase struck me with a blow that was even greater than terror. I would never believe the ground was steady again. Liangshan is a thoroughly capitalist newsman. Our newspaper's three-family village. He has used the knowledge given to him by the party to attack the party, writing many reactionary articles. In one of them, an essay about the growth of a sunflower, he dared to fart that flower relies on its own lust for life. How evil, how poisonous. The three-family village said the sun had dark shadows, meaning that the party has made errors. But Liangshan says the sunflower doesn't need the sun at all. His insidious idea is that China can be strong without the Communist Party. Isn't this singing the same tune as capitalist KMT reactionary revisionism? Liangshan is worse than capitalism, fiercer than the KMT, more dangerous than revisionism. Down with Liangshan. The poster went on to a second topic. Strip away Liangshan's skin. That Liangshan opposes the party and socialism is only natural. Let's investigate his history. His father was a doctor who came from Zhejiang to Hunan through tricking his private patients out of their money. So Liangshan learned this skill from his family. When he was young, he eagerly entered the KMT's youth league. His ex-wife is a rightist, and she certainly became a rightist under his influence. Then he saw by what happened to her that it won't do to oppose the party openly, and he used articles and poetry to try to undermine it secretly. So his injury to the revolution is even greater than his wife's. Chairman Mao used to teach us, shame is shame, and the mask must be stripped off. Now the great proletarian cultural revolution is stripping off Liangshan's skin to reveal his true appearance. The third section went, Liangshan is a bloodsucker. Liangshan had not only failed to make a contribution to the revolution, but has stolen a lot away. Although in the past he gave up a level of his salary, that was his pretense of progressiveness. In fact, he earned a lot of extra money for his articles. Every penny he earned was the blood of the people. He used the blood he sucked away to fatten himself up. And what did he give the people? Not artwork, but shit, garbage, poisonous weeds. The fourth section. What did Liangshan actually do? For many years, Liangshan edited a magazine called Correspondent for young, new newspapermen. And his sole purpose was to propagandize the capitalist new viewpoint and to instruct our young reporters in Western news techniques. He said news should be true, and to him this meant it should attack the party's faults and even slander our party. He said a reporter should have power, and when he needs information, he should use his courage and ingenuity to get it by any means possible. Isn't his meaning clear? He wants intellectuals to lead the country. Moreover, he uses the magazine to gild Western writers. In all those years, he used only one quotation from Chairman Mao, but hundreds from Tolstoy, Balzac, Shakespeare, Mark Twain. Liangshan, your eyes are blind. Go for a walk on Wall Street. Why don't you? Here you will bump into things until your head is bloody. Are you Chinese or a foreigner's dog? You have given our young reporters too many poisonous ideas. We now order Liangshan to confess his crimes, or else we will break his dog's head. There was more, but the words wouldn't stay still. I was trembling all over. The bright paper posters floating about me had become walls of iron. The unknown sandaled feet glimpsed beyond them those of enemies. Everything was backwards, distorted, corrupted, insane. I didn't know if I was dreaming or if my life at home was a dream. I hugged myself, pinching my arms, but I didn't wake up. I closed my eyes and opened them, but the words were still there. My revolutionary father was an enemy. My father, whose dream it was to join the party, was a capitalist. How had things been ruined? Why had he ruined things? I didn't know where to put my misery and my hatred. I would never trust my perception of reality again. Then I discovered the press photographer's son standing a few feet away from me, crying softly. Dazed, we turned back towards our headquarters, equally silent, equally miserable, equally afraid to see anyone, equally afraid to go home. Little Li and the Gon brothers were already there, Ashen and waiting. It was almost as if an instinct, bred in us through our short careers in Chairman Mao thought, told us to return to our revolutionary base, to turn automatically towards the revolution for security when our homes fell away beneath us. We had no words for each other, but we felt tremendously close, and we knew that even though our fathers were now capitalists and spies, we must go on rebelling. What we did not yet understand was that from the day forth we had lost the right to express our love and our loyalty. Revolutionary fervor would no longer be permitted to us, but we did have some kind of premonition that our office would be taken away. Sure enough, near dinner time, a worker in glasses named Zhuo Shawu arrived with about 10 of our classmates at his heels. He didn't have much to say. "This is no place for you, stinking intellectual sons. Get out." Then the other children grabbed our writing materials and pushed us out. Someone kicked me hard in the back of the leg. The door slammed sharply behind us. We stood for a long time in the courtyard, hugging trees and looking up at our old headquarters. At last, we began to cry. The difficulty. When the signal for dinner sounded, there was nothing to do but walk slowly home. We set off in our various directions, hating ourselves and the world, envying our revolutionary classmates, afraid of the knowledge that something terrible had begun, not yet comprehending its magnitude. I barely registered the loudspeaker's announcement that there would be an important radio broadcast that evening, and I passed the basketball court without really seeing the people preparing drums, flags, blank red posters, and fresh white paint for the parade. I was no longer part of that world. I had been kicked off of the team. I was an outcast. Someone had taken the lock off our door, but it was shut tight. Our home presented a peculiar, sad, unfriendly appearance, which only deepened my misery. I pushed my way in and discovered Father sitting in a dense cloud of cigarette smoke, which he was concentrating on making thicker. The butts lying on the wooden floor like wreckage after some disaster. He barely moved when I came in. It hurt me to look at him, so I headed towards the drawer where the meal tickets were kept. My hand shook on the handle. Then it was as if something swept over me, and I found myself swinging around, screaming out the question in my heart. "Father, is it true that you're a bloodsucker?" Suspicion, love, anger, sympathy, and hatred struggled against one another. I felt as if I would explode. Father was silent, signaling that he had heard me only by crushing out his cigarette and lighting a new one. I stared at the stub on the floor, long, white, and barely smoked. "Tell me," I demanded. "Tell me. You should tell me. I have to know." He remained silent, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to shake him. "Why don't you say anything?" He finally spoke, in what was close to a whisper. "You should always believe the party and Chairman Mao." He hadn't answered my question, and I stood staring and waiting. He made another effort. "The Cultural Revolution is a mass movement. The people who criticize me have deep proletarian feelings and a great love for Chairman Mao." I could barely believe my ears. It was all true, then. Father continued, "I've made a lot of mistakes. I should examine myself thoroughly. But as long as I'm faithful to the party and Chairman Mao, it won't be long before I mend my errors." I was scarcely listening. I could only repeat his crimes numbly, as if reciting a lesson. "Is it true you said China can be strong without the party? Is it true you used articles and poems to undermine it secretly? What about how you try to teach capitalist news reporting? How do you explain these things?" My father's hand trembled as he struck another match. Then, in the silence, we heard a great clattering on the stairs, and Liang and Liang Weiping burst into the room. They were both crying, and they ran directly to the bed and threw themselves onto it, hugging the pillows. Their sobs were terrible in the silence. Soon, Liang started accusing Father. "I'm so miserable being born into a family like this. First, I have a mother who prevented me from joining the League. Now that I'm finally accepted as a revolutionary, you have to ruin everything. Look, she cried, taking out a piece of paper. "Tonight I was supposed to be a marshal at the parades. This was the plan for the march. Do you think I can possibly face anyone now?" With a wail, she ripped her map into little pieces. Father sat by the table with his head in his hands, passively accepting Liang Fang's fury as if he deserved it. He reached automatically for his pack of cigarettes, but it was empty. Liang Weiping, always the gentlest of us, nudged Liang Fang as if asking her to control herself, and went into the other room and got another pack. As she handed it to Father, I asked him, "Do you know what they call us today? Sons of capitalist, reactionary, stinking intellectuals. They've cut us out of all their activities, kicked us out of the office. They won't let us do anything more." Father raised his head and repeated, "You should believe the party, believe Chairman Mao." His words sounded like a prayer, a principle kept in his heart to invoke in times of trouble. They had been the key to his spirit for the past 20 years. But Liang Fang raged. "Others don't believe you. They said you were a capitalist, a bloodsucker, a foreigner's dog." Then my father stood up, his face white, his words tumbling out in one breath. "It is because I'm none of these things that I believe in the party and Chairman Mao. I've done nothing to wrong to you. You can continue to participate in the revolution. If you want to, you can break off with me. Go live at a school if you like. But I'll tell you one thing. No matter how you hate me, I've always been loyal to Chairman Mao. And I've always supported the party and socialism. If I have to go, I'll go," she shouted, grabbing at her bedding and clothing. "I don't want this counter-revolutionary family. I don't need this counter-revolutionary father and mother." Liang Weiping followed her oldest sister's lead. "I'm going too," she said with resignation. "Maybe it's better that way." She stood up and started gathering her things. Father's eyes were red. Go, all of you go. I won't blame you. I don't want to hold you back." I don't know how the evening would have ended if the loudspeaker hadn't sounded outside our window. "The red radio waves were happy news. Everyone please tune in and listen carefully. Everyone please tune in." From force of habit cultivated only over the last few months, we rushed to the tiny transistor on the table. We arranged ourselves around it and laid our heads down so we could concentrate. Crackling from the radio came, "The August 8th decision of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party concerning the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution." It seemed that one of the purposes of the statement was to clarify the targets of the Cultural Revolution, and as we listened, the heavy stone that we bore on our backs became lighter and lighter, especially when we heard the fifth article. "Who are our enemies and who are our friends? The main target of the present movement is those within the party who are in authority and are taking the capitalist road. The strictest care should be taken into distinguishing between the anti-party, anti-socialist rightists and those who support the party and socialism but have said or done something wrong or have written bad articles or other works." When all 16 articles were finished, there were tears of joy in Father's eyes, and he said triumphantly, "See? Your father is no counter-revolutionary. I'm the third type of cadre. Someone who has made serious mistakes but is not an anti-party, anti-socialist rightist." My sister smiled and looked embarrassed at having been so upset. I felt ashamed that I had thought so harshly of Father. We began to discuss the posters calmly and decided that since he had already talked with the party about his membership in the KMT Youth League and about our mother, those problems wouldn't be regarded as serious crimes. His failure to quote Chairman Mao frequently in his writings could be considered a matter of education. The foul language and abuse in the posters merely showed the passion of the people, and were not to be taken seriously. Just as we were enjoying our renewed intimacy, we heard a blast of firecrackers and drums, like an earthquake under our feet. Liang Fang jumped up as if she had forgotten something. "The parade," she cried. "Oh, Father, I do want to go live at school, but that's just for convenience in the revolution, not because I want to move away from home." So Father helped her to pack her bag and tucked some cakes and sugar in the side to show that he had forgiven her. She left in a great hurry because she was late, and we stood on the balcony and watched her go. From then on, she was always off making revolution somewhere and never really lived at home again. Liang went into the kitchen to cook noodles because we had been so upset we had missed going to the dining hall. I sat and talked with father. I was still in shock because of what had happened to me that afternoon. Father comforted me. Don't be discouraged. Even if you don't participate in their group, your thought can follow the Cultural Revolution, and you can still learn from it. Every day you can read the newspapers, and you and I will have our own study class and make a plan for reading the whole Chairman Mao's works. We'll sit together in the evening and discuss them. I felt a lot better because I loved reading with my father. Still, nothing could make up for being excluded by my classmates. After dinner, father suddenly said, as if just struck the idea, maybe we should look through our things and see if we have anything that's not so good. If we get rid of them now, it might save us a lot of trouble later on. Remember how when China and Russia broke relations, I had to get rid of all my books about the Soviet Union? So we went into the large inner room and looked through his books. He selected only a few, pulling them out with regret. They included Liu Shaoqi's famous discussion on the training of a Communist Party member. I knew the earnest way my father always read everything. Underlining and annotating, every book represented hours of labor and thought. We went through the magazines too, where I came on a picture of Liu Shaoqi standing with Chairman Mao. What about this one? I asked. Shall we throw away the part with Chairman Liu on it? Oh no, better not do that. We'd better turn it to the work team, my father answered. At the time, I thought he was being overcautious, but it turned out his political experience saved us from disaster. Our downstairs neighbors cut Liu Shaoqi out of the picture, and they were denounced for deliberately ruining the photograph of Chairman Mao. This kind of thing happened so often that eventually a rule was established that whenever someone wanted to replace an old picture of Chairman Mao with a new one, he had to notify the leaders of his unit and get their permission. The books and pictures made a small pile on the table, and with them, as reminders of his crimes, Father sat down with his brush and ink to criticize himself. When I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, he was still writing, his normally well-groomed hair in disorder, concentrating so hard that he didn't even hear me get up.